Welcome and thank you for joining us for the inaugural Small Enterprise Webinar series. We are extremely thrilled to have you join us, give us your time, and your participation, presence, and patience is greatly appreciated today. I'm your host, Sridhar Raj. I run a small SaaS platform called SME Desk, and we're in alpha stage, and we're just about to kick that off. In collaboration with Aspire and with Wadhwani Foundation, here we are today conducting our inaugural webinar. Obviously, all of you understand the circumstances under which this format and mode is being adopted. Your patience, attention, and time is greatly appreciated. So really quickly, an introduction to Aspire Media, and some of you and most of you having been attending some of the events offline would know about the Small Enterprise Business Magazine, the Aeonian Awards for Startups, the Small Enterprise Awards, Business Awards, SEBA, that's been held every year for the last 4 years. So quick word on Aspire Media. Aspire Media has been around for about 10, 11 years. This is our 11th year going. And founded in 2009, the community of small, medium enterprises. So here's a quick look at some of the offerings. So we have a publishing group. We have outreach, conference and events group, and we have a services arm that focuses on consulting and provides a whole host of services to small and medium enterprises and to startups. So that's about a brief introduction to Aspire Media. Now, some housekeeping arrangements I want to get through before I kickstart my portion of the presentation. I would put it in context. Samir, my colleague from Wadhwani Foundation, who is in Mumbai, is going to be talking about a very important subject, which I consider, really timely and something that each of founders and owners of small businesses and startups would much appreciate and see value in, which is about passing on from generation to generation the ownership and the management of a business. So that's extremely relevant. So hang on, mine is just an appetizer, and the rest of the presentation by Samir is really the main course. So really briefly, from a housekeeping standpoint, for most of my presentation, and I think Samir's, we will have you on mute from a voice capability, but you could always add on to the chat and ask your questions. If they're relevant, and if I can, I will stop, pause, and try to address them. But if you hold off your question to the later part of the presentation, which I'll keep very brief for about 15 minutes, I'll try to spend about 10 minutes answering and giving you time for Q&A. So you could raise your hand at that point. The host will manage the mic and allow you to speak into your microphone and ask your questions, and we can take it from there. Once again, thank you all for joining us in this inaugural session as we work out our processes, and really delighted to have you on board. My topic that I chose was to address the community and ensure that I talk to you about the current crisis that all of us know we're in the midst of. And I think it's kind of ironic that I picked a certain pattern for this deck. I titled this as "Change is the Only Constant." That's a phrase that dates back to 500 before Christ from a Greek philosopher. And that is one of my top, couple of phrases that I've held on to and I've looked at every time a crisis arrives. I remind myself that this too shall pass, and the background behind the topic that I chose to brief you and talk to you about. So just from an expectation setting standpoint, why am I even qualified to address this audience, and why am I here today? So without carbon dating myself, hopefully you can all see on that slide, back in the late 80s, early 90s, I landed in London with nothing but a suitcase, like most of us immigrants to a foreign shore, right in the peak of what was a very brief year-long recession. And the struggles through the corporate world at that time in a new country, in a foreign land, was quite challenging. Overcoming that, had a number of lessons for me, but I'm sharing that with you from a perspective that was merely an economic recession, and I had to surpass that to really kickstart my career and gain a growth trajectory that would take me through the rest of the few decades that had to follow. But I'll draw your attention to 3 key events which you can see in front of you after that. And those 3 key events were black swan events. All of you can Google what a black swan event is if you don't know one, but it's one of those surprises that is hard to comprehend and pretty sizable in nature. It comes from an author of management books, and I leave the definition aside, but those are significant events. And these 3 were significant events in my life and time. The fact that I had to think through and put this out there, jokingly, I was just telling myself, just look at the pattern there. Every 7 odd years, I went through one of these. And I have failed a number of times starting ventures, but these were 3 big failures for me. And they were pretty hard to overcome. They decimated me most of the time, and I had to rise back like a phoenix out of the ashes each time. So these I hold as significant milestones in my life. But like I said, the gist of the message is, this too shall pass. I'm here with you, talking to you all today, wanting to share some thoughts, maybe not lessons that I particularly learned, but some thoughts on how to handle the current scenario really quickly, make sure that you have some takeaways really briefly. I don't have a magic wand. I'm not going to solve all your problems, but I'm here to share some thoughts with you. I look forward to your interaction, to your questions, and hope to make this as interactive as possible under the circumstances. I'm usually fairly mobile on the stage. I know some of you have seen me before, so it's kind of it's a straitjacket situation for me here. So again, thank you. So that's kind of the background behind, bring it behind. I would really start with the phrase, when the going gets tough. Just as an anecdote, here's an event that just happened over the last couple of weeks. Mike Bird is a Wall Street Journal journalist from Hong Kong. You can all read on the screen here what happened. So when the going gets tough, people get really creative. And here's an ode to students from China when they were put through this switch from manual life of learning and schooling to an online platform to share their homework. This is what they did. It didn't succeed, but I thought this was kind of funny, and I thought I should, this should help set the stage for our conversation. I mean, we live in a very serious time. I did a play on the slide deck format in the same context. And this is another incident that happened in this time of crisis that tells us how innovative and creative human beings are, even in this time of crisis. So I hope you enjoy that example. I look forward to your comments on chat. So really quick, my whole point of view here is, it's whenever something untoward happens or unexpected happens, you really need to take stock. And this applies to all aspects of life. It obviously applies to business and startups. So that's the primary, that's the very essential practical suggestion that I have. Take stock of your financials, of your balance sheet, of your incoming and outgoing. So receivables and payables, take stock of your inventory and supply chain, see where you are, what you could do to improve those at this point in time under the circumstances. Take a look at your human resources, your human resource pool, your hiring processes, the kind of talent you have on board, the kind of talent gaps you have. It's a time for self-assessment. It's a time for personal self-assessment as a founder and CEO, as a business owner, as a partner, as a trading partner. It's time to reflect, and it's a very practical, one-on-one tip for all of you business owners. And I look forward to questions on these. If you have, I mean, these are pretty straightforward, and I'm going to run through them. These are my thoughts, and I wanted to share those with you. The second one is to diversify. So, I mean, this is the portfolio approach to running a business. It's a portfolio approach to managing your investments. It's a portfolio approach to startup investment. Same thing, diversify. So you got to take a look at your offerings, your services, or your products, depending on what it is that you focus on. what is your core, and ensure that your offerings are aligned, that they are broadly addressing a market. You're not stuck in one niche. Maybe you need to take a look at other avenues that are parallel and offer synergies. Take a look at your partnerships. I'd like to add here that this is not just something that I'm saying and spewing out to the audience. This is something that we have been practicing. We have been practicing in our collaboration with Aspire Media. Aspire Media has been practicing. A lot of the businesses that I consult with, they have been practicing. So this is where, the cake that we bake, we are eating it too. And it's really working. It's very funny when you step back and take a look and analyze your business. You kind of discover so many aspects that you didn't when you were running to scale or grow the business. So when you were fully occupied trying to make things happen and execute, you didn't get an opportunity to step back and reflect. And when you do reflect, you find opportunities in these aspects. So hence, diversification should be on the top of your agenda as one of your to-dos to analyze, study, and ensure that you have mitigated any risk by being siloed in one vertical or one market or one product. So I think this is a great time to step back and take a look at that. So we are looking at markets that were there's a lot of focus on tier 2 and 3, but we are also looking in partnerships with global companies on markets that we can address overseas, which wasn't our focus before. So that's an example. So channels, again, channel is something where your partnerships can identify some new ones, but you could also step back and take a look at maybe digital avenues that you may not have explored before. So now is a great time to do that, and I just wanted to suggest these talking points so that if you have any questions, I'll be glad to address them. So the third aspect of what I would recommend is optimizing. When you step back and take a look at your business, the operational efficiencies, now is a great time, in this time of our crisis, in this time of slowness in trade, is a great time to reflect on your human resources, cut costs, optimize, improve efficiencies there, manage your cash very well. Cash flow positive for startups is a huge deal. Not a lot of focus has been there on it for the last 2 to 4 years of easy money. Those days may be behind us. So it's time to take a look at your cash management processes, a zero budget process, so that you balance your sheet and run your business efficiently. Expense management, another area to take a look at. Obviously, what to do there. Salesforce is another interesting avenue. There's a lot of push to ensure sales teams are built on commission basis rather than a proportion that is a guaranteed payout. So it is one of those tough calls you need to make. These are all individual decisions based on your circumstances, but these are points that I wanted to share with you, are areas that you could to optimize your organization. I have one other aspect that I would like to talk to you about, and that is automation. I've spent a whole seminar on this a couple of times, but I'm finding it every day over the last 6 to 8 weeks that startups that I deal with, I'm finding gaps in their processes. I'm finding a lot of Excel spreadsheet-based work that they're doing. I'm finding lack of platforms, lack of standardization. So again, this is an opportunity to take a look at your current state, identify gaps, define your problem statements before you kick off any solution ventures, and you have to adopt to thrive. So technology adoption now, particularly digital platforms and digital technology, is something that I would highly encourage you to keep on top of your priority list. This tough times are the times you build great businesses. There's a lot of history on it, and this too shall pass. And economists will argue whether it's going to be a V-shaped, L-shaped, T-shaped, all the alphabet letter shaped recoveries, but there is going to be a recovery. So my big bold message and takeaway for you is be nimble, or in other words, be agile. And most important 3 Ps that I would really encourage you to remember is people, products, and processes. Those are the areas that you need to focus. Broadly, the subjects and points that I talked to you about cover these. Ultimately, it boils down to keeping these 3 Ps in mind, managing your business to optimizing, making efficient, and growing these 3 Ps. So that way you will hopefully have a successful business growth. You'll have you'll be ready for when this turnaround happens. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Another American phrase that's been around since the early 1900s, and that's really what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening. I am available. I'll share with you my QR code and my coordinates. You can reach out to me. Hashtags are out there. Those are the most important ones. Social distancing, self-quarantine if you're ill, stay safe, and ultra hygiene is of utmost importance. So you could connect with me. I would love to answer any of your questions, both here as well as on this chat session. So you could open it up to Q&A and raise your hand, and please proceed. We have about 5 to 7 minutes. Hi, Lakshay.
Hi. So we are a blockchain enterprise solution company.
Okay.
So right now there is an economic crisis going on because of virus. So everybody is in a panic. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? But at the end we have a solution.
Okay.
So, but the problem is there that how to tell industry that we have a solution, because industry is not accepting the solution.
So
they are like we do not want to go for automation, but the automation is only the solution at the end.
Okay, so Lakshay, I think it starts with how you approach this, right? My quick take, I mean, I don't know all the details about what you're doing, and maybe you can ask me some of it offline, is, the very phrase you started off with. You offered a technology, but you didn't state the problem you're solving. So I would highly encourage you to phrase and frame the problem you're solving and how you're solving it. Technology doesn't matter to most people, right? Any of those buzzwords really don't matter. It matters in a certain context. It matters as a competitive advantage. It matters in the frame of the audience that you're speaking to, as long as they are technologists. But for a business, there's a problem to solve. The question is, why should I come to Lakshay and his team? And how strong is this team, and why is it going to solve my problem? And how effectively are you going to solve it? So I would really rephrase how you start. It is challenging, but then you need to look at, I won't even call them low-hanging fruit, but you need to look at an option of positioning with your customers in terms of a combination of a POC that is partially paid on deliverable and prove that your solution works. So I need to see more action in terms of a working functional product that solves a problem. As a business, even today, like I'm going out there, I'm selling SaaS products, micro SaaS products to small businesses. Now these are a dime a dozen. There's literally no competitive advantage, right? CRM, accounting, you've got so many open source, you've got so many SaaS products out there, you've got the big bull Zoho, a number of others. But still, that the relationship building, the trust building, how we are different, the positioning, all that helps in getting the customer's attention, addressing their problems, and getting a sale, frankly. Hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Thank you. You can chat if your mic is not working. Feel free to ask me on chat. I know I breezed through the presentation. Hopefully, you guys found it relevant. I would like some feedback on it, please. Go ahead. I can see your question, or I can see you type. Thank you, Rajesh. It really depends. I mean, each area, right? So, I mean, my favorite right now is I'm looking at a lot of deep tech and robotics. A lot of work going on. Most of them are hidden somewhere. We have to go and unearth them as investors, or from the investment community, or from a leadership community. Run-of-the-mill, 2 guys in an app days are over. Everyone is going to tighten their belts. And again, I have an article on LinkedIn. You can look at it. It says, if I could predict the future, I really can't. But one thing I know is we're going to come back. There will be a COVID 20 and 21. I'll go out on the limb and say that. There may be far worse mutations than this flu is. Life goes on. So the 7+ billion people on the planet, unless there is an event that wipes us all out, we're just going to be going forward, and it's a very positive outlook that I have. Competition towards startups, that was this question. So the other audience knows it. Competition is always there. So any Me Too's are going to get wiped out. I strongly believe a Series A won't follow. I have written exactly about this on that article on LinkedIn. It's going to be very hard to get from angel money, maybe easy, but after that, it's going to be very hard to get to Series A. B and C is a whole another matter. So I think it's time to tighten your belts, and it's really time for Indian entrepreneurs to solve hard problems. And I'm just amazed at how many are doing that. You know, just last weekend I was on the jury panel listening to a couple of very deep tech companies, and I was very, very impressed. And sadly, there isn't enough showcasing of them, and there aren't enough investors. And one of my close friends is working on a motor for an EV startup kind of an environment. And again, investors aren't in discussions. Not a lot of understanding is there on what the potential holds for a venture like his. So again, low end, any Me Too's, it's going to be challenging. Hope I've answered your question, Jem. And sorry, I've got a run of chats here. I will try to address this. I think some tax ops are being talked about even today, but this is Ramesh from Jaya. But you know, why would a business owner hang their hat on that? I mean, you shouldn't even be in business if you're looking for SOPs. SOPs are just, you know, have always existed. We should let really challenged and really impacted individuals, you know, utilize SOPs. But that's not the way to have a thriving small business community, I think. I think it's better that we have avenues and platforms. We have more technology adoption now. I think this has already spurred some of it. Look at the channels we're using now. I mean, how many of us would have wanted to be on a webinar and not in a five-star hotel, you know, on a lounge or, you know, having a one-on-one? So, I mean, I've got schools, I've got tutors who are adopting web technology. Cisco CEO just announced about 6+ billion minutes of meeting that has taken place on Cisco's WebEx platform over the last 2 weeks. Srinath, so I've got about 2 minutes. Genofay Biotech. Any rise in interest arrangements in biotech? Actually, we are in talks, and I see a lot of interest. It's capital intensive, as I've told some folks I met recently, and you know, definitely something that there is a segment or a community that is highly specialized and does go ahead and invest in them. I think there are a lot of leaders out there. Everyone has an opinion, and I have mine. Anything else, you could, you know, probably take it offline. You know how to reach me. I want to hand it over to Samir. Like I said, he's the main course. I'm really looking forward to his talk. That subject matter is very close to me. I've had some personal losses. My extended family is in business, multiple businesses. I've always been screaming at the top of my lungs that succession is something they need to pay attention to. So I really would request all of you to stay till the end. There's a lot of goodie giveaways that are going to be discussed, the method and process at the last 2 minutes as I close. So I hand it over to Samir from here. Samir, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Hey, Shreya, thank you. Thank you for handing it over to me. And I'm going to be speaking on succession planning with respect to 2 dimensions. The first is, since most of my last 25, 26 years of experience has been to deal with the small businesses, and with the succession planning issue really troubles both small businesses and large businesses. But most of what I'll be speaking on will be relevant to what I've experienced with respect to small businesses. The second dimension is that when you think of succession planning, you can think of it in 2 ways. The first is when there is a family business, and family business is talking about handing over the business, or really ensuring that the longevity of the business is managed through the next generation. And the second way is really when you're thinking of succession, when it comes to handing it over to a professional. So these are 2 ways. And I'll be covering the topics with respect to small businesses and with respect to looking at succession from both points of views, basically the family issues as well as really looking at professionals to look at these businesses. So as you can see on the screen, here's the agenda that I'll be covering. First of all, let's very quickly look at how bad the succession planning issue is. So I'll be talking about very quickly some of the research that we have done, and it's fascinating to discover the succession planning is really a global issue. There are 5 problems that I believe really ail succession, and I'll be talking about them. Then we will look at what are the specific recommendations that we believe small businesses should really adopt to be able to overcome these problems. Let's have a summary, and then I'll very quickly talk about, in terms of how we can handle that. So if you look at it, folks, this shows really a couple of facts and figures out there, and let's talk about very quickly. There are the 4 buckets that I have. When we did the research and found out that, if you look at the public limited companies, the small businesses, the extreme left part, the bucket that you see on the slide, you will find that the poorly managed general public limited companies, the small companies, when I say small companies, I look at any company which is up to $50 million. So it will vary from industry to industry. It will vary from country to country. But if I were to really generalize, if you find poorly managed public limited small companies, you will find the evidence that 60% of them have yielded only between 1 and 5% in terms of returns to the shareholders. So that's really low. If you really look at the remaining ones, 40% of them have had negative returns, which means if you have poorly managed succession as a topic or as an issue, you will find that mostly they perform abysmally low. So that's the fact, and it's not only with India, it's globally. The second is what we find, and this is based on various studies that have been done by not only academic institutions, but consulting firms and our own experience of dealing with the family businesses, is that most of the wealth is destroyed really in the 3rd generation. So ask yourself, if you're in the 3rd generation or 2nd generation and thinking of 3rd generation, I do not know the composition of the audience here, but let's talk about 2nd generation, 3rd generation is where you will find tremendous problems that really plague the businesses, and there is a wealth destruction that happens. And you can see the chart out there. Really, 73% of this businesses really last till 3rd generation, whereas 22% only reach the 4th generation. That tells you a story in terms of what happens in the 3rd generation, and that's pretty telling. The third fact, which is very important fact, is really the misaligned generational goals and identity conflict. What do I mean by this? If you really look at it psychologically, and there's a lot of study done on this, is that when you think of the generations, each generation wants to carve out its own identity. Let's say you have a father who has started a business, you have next generation, more often than not, especially these days, in the younger generation, want to really look at creating their own world, own business, own identity, and they are searching for their own identity in the creation of that new business, which means even if the previous generation wants to really bequeath that business and hand it over and ensure that it's managed well, it's not necessary that the next generation will agree with it, because there is misalignment in terms of what they want to do in life, and those goals really are misaligned, and which is why it creates a lot of problems in terms of looking at succession as an issue. The fourth is more of a process issue, which is where I think most of the family businesses really stumble. And this is because it's family business. They believe that if something is understood, need not be spelled out. Whereas the good process, a good formal process of looking at succession as an issue, really relies on a very specific milestone-based step-by-step process that needs to be followed by both the generations. And this is where you will see a big difference in terms of how it really impacts the quality and the outcome of succession planning. When I think of outcome, I basically mean whether the succession has led to wealth creation, and secondly, whether the succeeding generation is as happy, interested, keen, passionate to do the business as the previous generation. So that's how bad it is, and it is prevalent across the world. Now let's look at, therefore, looking at why does this happen? So what we did was we looked at the host of issues that really plague these businesses, and we looked at 5 key problems that we believe are really important. And let's look at the tip of the iceberg out there that you see on the slide. It's basically, I talked about the impaired process of making succession decisions, which results in communication gaps, it results in misunderstandings, and that process really involves, there's a necessity to look at involving an outsider involving somebody who is a subject matter expert to intervene. But often there is a lot of resistance by the family members because they don't want to talk about family issues outside in the public with the professionals. So that results in impaired process. The second, which is the fourth point that you see on the slide, is unfavorable situations governing the need for succession. What does it mean? Sridhar just now talked about the times are so bad, and so true. I mean, the global recession is around, there is a slowdown, there is a coronavirus, and in these difficult situations, what typically happens is that you're not in a mood to think about succession planning as an issue, although you want all hands on the deck, you want all brains really ticking, really contributing to solving the problem. But these are unfavorable situations. So everybody is focused on ensuring protecting their family valor, family silver, and therefore they are not looking at talking about this at this juncture. And that really results in basically postponement of the problem and solving the problem. But really, if you really look at it, underneath the water, what lies beneath are more complex issues. What are they? First of all, there is complex ownership models of business, which is basically prevalent in most of the emerging countries. Like, for example, in India, you have 75 million MSMEs, and there are various estimates of 63 million to 100 billion. Let's leave that aside for a while. But the issue is a lot of these enterprises are built because they did not want to reveal certain truths, certain facts. And that really creates complex structures in terms of ownership. It makes it further difficult for people to talk to each other and solve succession issues. Because succession is all about identity and power. And that really creates a lot of complex problems. Below that is really the mismatch of expectations born out of the family bonds. It's such a touchy issue. It's a very emotional issue that when you're thinking about generations, when you're thinking of brothers, sisters, and siblings, and looking at sharing the family wealth, somewhere there is a problem because you tend to be like business, and you basically bring in the relations when you're thinking of business. As a result of which, basically you achieve neither. And what we have found is that results in mismatch of expectations out of family bonds. Generational gaps we have already talked about in terms of identity and their goals, so I won't sort of dwell on it more right now. I talked about it earlier. So these are the 5 problems that really ail succession. And of course, there are different nuances and dimensions to this, but I thought it would be good to sort of have this problem summarized here. So how can we solve it? So what we thought was to basically look at ensuring that we follow certain guidelines, certain principles, which are very, very important to solve these problems. So let's talk about what that is needed. First of all, what is needed is really collaborate very well and decide who is going to be the beneficiary of the succession planning. Often businesses, families, members don't discuss this out. It's assumed that the beneficiary is going to be the next generation. It's assumed that the beneficiary otherwise could be the previous generation, but need not be. And I think that needs to be spelled out very clearly. Second is really to express and have a very noble intent. Now it's easier said than done, but I have found it absolutely missing. Nobody even communicates that we have noble intentions and when we are discussing succession, and that really results in a lot of misunderstandings. In one of the cases that I remember, for lack of time, we will not be able to talk about it too much, but the father was so much interested in getting the succession planning done. He actually hired a consulting firm. The consulting firm did the entire study, came out with brilliant recommendations. The father, everybody agreed, and he felt very nice that finally we have got an answer how to bequeath his wealth to his son. And the previous night to the steering committee meeting that they were having, son told father that I'm not interested in your business. You assumed that I was. And the next day, when they met each other in a steering committee meeting with the consultant, and I had the opportunity to be there as a part of that meeting, actually father had tears in his eyes because he said, I created so much wealth and I want to ensure that the wealth is bequeathed to you because I want you to benefit. And then son blankly said, I don't want to do it. Now imagine if this could have been sorted out, this could have been discussed earlier, we wouldn't have had this situation. So there are these issues in terms of noble intent expressing, and then the other person could be responding saying that whether they want it or they don't, and this results into problems. The other issue is never mix issues from a person, and often this happens when you think of something going wrong, you identify that person with the issue. It's very tough, but I think one needs to practice it very clearly. Keep the person out of the equation, think of an issue, and both the people who are solving that issue should think of issue which is external to them. And that often is very, very difficult. And this requires practice. This requires understanding of what does it mean when you think of an issue to be solved in succession. So this is very important. The other fact, which is the fourth point out there, is decision biases. Now, I won't be able to talk about all the decision biases. There are over 30 different decision biases that creep in when we decide things. But this is led by each one's experience, each one's opinion, each one's way of looking at life and business and family is very different, and we all know that. But that really colors really the lenses that one adopts to be able to solve these issues, and that creates biases. One should be very wary of looking at these biases, and therefore objectivity is very important. The fifth is be open to using a commonly trusted third-party advisor. Now, the fifth point and the sixth point, which is basically the process-oriented involving a professional, India has a long way to go. Developed nations like Europe and the US have advanced to a particular extent, but it's still very, very difficult. And that really is very important when we think about process of solving succession issues. A, family businesses do not know how to solve succession planning issues. They just have emotions. B, a lot of times the professionals know how to solve it, but professionals are not inducted into the process of solving that issue because of the whole paradigm that family businesses don't want to involve others. These two are process-oriented issues. The number 7, 8, 9, and 10, which are there on your slide, are very important as well, and these are the underlying principles or guidelines that can be talked about across these different areas. The first is, it's often thought that when you want to solve business issues, you need to build logic. Emotion is bad. And when you think of family, you are very emotional because you're talking about relations. But either case is not actually useful for solving succession planning. One must understand that logic is good as long as it does not ignore good emotion. So the difference really is between good emotion and bad emotion, good logic and bad logic. It's not the difference between logic and versus emotion. In succession planning, especially because one is dealing with relations and then handing over to professionals, this becomes very, very critical. The other three factors are really create and respect a professional and personal code of conduct, looking at using decision-making science and observe your own behaviors. This requires a little bit of study. We intuitively know it, but I think both these points require a lot of understanding of what does it mean when you think of decision-making science. And partly it deals with the decision biases that I talked about earlier, and partly it deals about using your observing your own behaviors when you think of solving a problem. That's very, very important. We call reflective leadership as one of the highest forms of leadership, because a leader at that point of time has to reflect and then act, reflect and act. And that becomes very difficult in emotional issues like succession planning. So this is very critical. And finally, one has to observe the local and global laws of land, and that's very important. The compliance is very important. So a lot of these problems of succession are because of the complex structures of the organizations. Somewhere somebody is trying to sort of circumvent the law, trying to avoid things, hide things. Don't do that, because at the end of the day, what you're going to do is that you're going to not benefit from it, plus you're not going to be not going to be compliant. And lastly, this all impacts succession planning issues. So if I were to really look at what is it that one needs to do at the guidelines or principles levels, these are the 10 recommendations. They obviously do not deal with specifically a process of solving the succession planning issues, because that's a subject matter by itself. But if I were to really look at therefore, these 10 recommendation guidelines are very, very critical. So let me just summarize this. So this is a simple chart. On the left-hand side, I've kind of summarized what fails succession and what are the real problems, which we talked about. On the right-hand side, you have these 10 recommendations. In the middle, we have just tried to capture how each one reacts. What's the response of the older generation and the younger generation? And for lack of time, I would not sort of be able to sort of explain all this. But you see the emotions out there, they range from anger, disappointment, looking at thinking and probing, and looking at somebody, looking at questioning somebody else's intent. And often this results into a lot of confusion, a lot of miscommunication, lack of spelling out what is exactly required, which then makes the whole subject of succession planning pretty difficult for families to solve. If you were to look at adopting this 10 recommendation, we believe it's very likely that you will get the desired response from both the generations, which is essentially a smiley face. So that's about it. In the interest of time, what I would do is I would love to hear your questions on succession planning. And thank you for your, I think you're sending some compliments, and I appreciate that. Love to hear your questions. Either you could raise hands, or you could perhaps send me the questions on chat. Thank you very much. Lakshay, go ahead.
So you have talked nicely that there is a generation gap. Everything is going on right now. So there's a slides about, so because of there's a new technology coming, that is blockchain, AI, IoT, cybersecurities. but the old generation is not understanding that this is the technology which is going to take forward the businesses, and the automation is the only solution to make the economy workable again. Because right now we have seen a Yes Bank going fraud, various banks are going bankruptcy, so the public has lost the faith in the ecosystem. So
Sure.
how you think the new technologies they will solve the problem? Everybody knows that, but how you think the India will take it? How early the India will take it? That's my question.
No, that's a good question. And in fact, the other day I was speaking at another conference. I talked about what is stopping people from adopting technology. One of the biggest fears is transparency. Technology brings in transparency. There is a hesitation that I sense on bringing the transparency. And secondly, if the older generation is not convinced of the technology, it often is about articulating the benefits of that. We assume that the technology will bring in those benefits because somebody who has experience in technology and implementing technology assumes it, but the older generation is not necessarily convinced that it's going to benefit technology. In fact, a lot of times, because of patriarchal to society, they fear job losses. They believe that technology will be able to create that transparency and communication, which they inherently are not comfortable with. I think this problem can be solved by not either rather, I'm falling both ways, evangelizing technology and proper communication to all the stakeholders which are involved, the beneficiaries which are involved in after you implement the technology. I think these two factors are very critical. So I would say let's focus on these two, and it's likely that you will make certain headway. Okay, Ramesh, you're talking about will digital transformation training in the older generation helps them to bridge the gap with the next generation? Yes, certainly. I mean, there is no question about it. I think the whole idea that I do not know is very important. It takes humility to actually accept that I do not know what I do not know. And when it comes to training, especially in transformation training between older generation and new generation, the moment both generations accept it, the training will do a lot of good. But if both generations fundamentally not convinced that they do not know what they do not know, it's unlikely even the training will solve that problem. So you have to ask yourselves in your deep down your heart and mind, are you really agreeing that you do not know what you don't know? I think that's the key thing that I would focus on. Yeah, Arun, you're there. I think you have a question, I believe.
Though I agree that succession planning has been a disaster. Even if you look at the example of Reliance, for example, it was mess. So yes, I agree on that. But as a SME, I guess we are all too busy just trying to make a living, and succession planning really doesn't come as a priority. I think that's true for all SMEs. So maybe you're right. Maybe in the second generation or the third generation, yes, it becomes a problem. But me being a first generation entrepreneur, I guess I'm too busy just trying to build up a business. So what is your recommendation for a person like me?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arun. And at the start, I talked about two dimensions: succession when it comes to next generation, and succession when it comes to handing over to professionals. So I would talk about the second dimension as far as your question is concerned. I've seen a lot of businesses wherein it's very tough for the first generation entrepreneur to look at handing over or delegating to a professional, because always one is really focused on hands-on. When you're thinking of inducting professionals, it becomes all the more important to actually manage that process well. And it starts with baby steps. You should begin with looking at doing with one function, second function, and then gradually sort of deal with that subject little, over a period of, let's say, 1 or 2 years. Because only when you delegate and when you supervise well, the scale will happen in your business. And that's the critical thing as far as the first generation is concerned. So I think it's a limited explanation in the interest of time. I guess I think we have very few minutes left now. Probably offline we could take it as a more detailed sort of discussion. We'll be happy to answer that. You can reach out to Aspire Media, and then I'll be happy to answer those questions.
We'll do that. Thank you.
I would like to once again thank everybody for staying on, and thank you, Samir. That was just a real good breeze through what I think personally to me, my extended family is in business, and I understand the value of that. And I've been harping this over and over again, and even in my LinkedIn post, to me, both the whole interstate situations that are unfortunate, as well as succession planning, which should be like you mentioned, an effective part of business life cycle planning, are very, very critical. And I really was looking forward to your talk on that. So
Great.
again,
In fact, I've written an article on that. We'll be able to share with the audience as well as you later. That will be lovely.
thank you so much. So I really wanted to quickly thank everyone for your attendance, for your participation, for your patience as we come to the conclusion of this inaugural Small Enterprise Webinar series. But more importantly, the 25,000 rupee worth of giveaway for every small business is on the table, and there is a process for that. We'll be sending you a questionnaire link for the 40-odd participants that are live with us today at the end of the show. Please do fill it out in detail so that you could get some of the serious business queries answered from experts at Wadhwani Foundation. You could get to participate in the SEBA award function with the goodies and benefits that are mentioned there. You get a month's of subscription to the Small Enterprise magazine. So that is in no small measure something you could get off the shelf. This is something that is specifically done for our inaugural session for you as attendees who have taken time out and have invested your valuable and precious time to listen to both of us speak here. Once again, thank you so much for your participation, and signing off is Sridhar here. Thank you, Samir. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you, Aspire. I loved and enjoyed interacting with all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.